What is going on, college basketball fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Danny Hoops podcast. I believe this is episode 6. I've really been enjoying making these for you guys, and I really hope you guys are enjoying them as well. Make sure you guys follow me on Twitter at SixManDanny on Twitter. Very active on there, tweeting during the games, tweeting when I go live, when I post a video, all that good stuff. Really good follow. Make sure you guys go check me out there. And that is the place where you guys will be asking your questions for the Danny Hoops podcast every week. So if you guys want your question asked on next week's podcast or any podcast in the future, follow me on the Twitter, and I will be asking for those questions every week on Wednesday, because we are now going to be, as I'm sure you guys can tell if you guys are watching this, putting the podcast out as videos now instead of live streams. I feel like a lot of people watch them afterwards, and the live streams, just because it's hard to watch them Thursday nights at 10 p.m. So now they will be premiering live as a video on YouTube on noon every single Thursday, which means we will be recording them Wednesday nights. So get in your questions on Wednesday on Twitter if you guys want your college basketball question asked at the end of the podcast. But we got a good amount of stuff to talk about today. We're going to be talking about all the major upsets that have been going around in college basketball. I mean, I feel like there's just a ton of them, and a lot of them have been because of some great atmospheres in college basketball. So that will take us to our next part of the podcast, where we will be talking about some of the hardest places to play in college basketball and some of the more underratedly harder places to play in college basketball. And then we are going to be talking about, with UConn and Purdue being upset, who should be the number one team in the country at this point in time. And then, as always, at the end of the podcast, we will be giving you guys my top 5 AP National Player of the Year contenders and my top 3 national championship contenders. And finally, some big shakeups when it comes to those. And then, of course, I will take your guys' questions at the end. So, and those questions coming from Twitter. So again, make sure you guys follow the Twitter. But let's get right into it. Real quick, I want to talk about the big news. If you guys haven't seen my most recent video, I'm just going to kind of give you guys a brief explanation about it, because I already made a whole video about it. But pretty much in a nutshell, the NCAA committee, led by Greg Sankey, which is the commissioner for the SEC, are trying to lead and push onto the NCAA board that the March Madness tournament should expand to 90 or 96 teams. And the thing that he's pushing is that any Division One college sport that has over 200 Division One teams in the sport, 25% of those teams should compete in the end year tournament, which means 25% of the 300 some teams that are in college basketball will be competing in the tournament, and that comes to about 90 teams. And I think that's way too many. I don't like it at all. You can hear me do a full rant about that as a video already up on the channel. But let's get into this week's topics of the podcast. First up, we're going to talk about all these big time upsets that have been going on in college basketball. I just watched an amazing game right before recording this. 2 amazing games, really. So many really good games on this year. But TCU defeated Baylor on the road in Waco with not a last second shot, but with a 3-pointer with about 3 seconds left. Amazing game. And then a block shot on the other end. Really good defensive possession there to close it out for the Horned Frogs. Mike Miles in that game dropped 33 points. Mike Miles and TCU starting to make some noise and are going to climb their ranks this week, and especially if they can defeat a very hot Iowa State team this Saturday. But also Providence, big time upset over UConn in the AMP. I mean, that place was rocking. Providence beat them by double digits in the end. So they really played that game super well, and I think UConn's offense is starting to slow down a little bit. So I'm interested to see if they're going to pick it up. They played in two of the hardest environments in college basketball, and they were during Christmas break, so they could have been a lot worse, especially that Xavier environment if they played with full students in. But two back-to-back losses for UConn, the team that I believed was the number one team in the country. So two big-time upsets, and Providence is on an 8-game win streak. So shout out to the Friars. Bryce Hopkins showed up whenever they need him in these big games. He is showing up. He had a massive game against Marquette, and he had a massive game against UConn. Two big wins. Providence, like I said, 8-game win streak. They are 4-0 and number one ranked in the Big East at this point in time. I believe they're one game up on Xavier now because of that win, but both Xavier and Providence still undefeated in league play. But upsets all across the board. We're going to get to them all. Rutgers upsets number one Purdue in Mackey Arena. Tough environment to play there, but Cliff Amorie, very, very good defensive center and offensive center. I think he is one of the more underrated players in college basketball. Rutgers just had a lot of players step up, and they hit a three, the go-ahead three to win the game with around 25 seconds left in that game. Just unbelievable game. Cliff Amorie, super good player. Rutgers, Caleb McConnell. I mean, they got defensive players all across the board. They are one of the best defensive teams in the country, and I think underratedly so. So Rutgers picks up a big win, and I think that is going to help them eventually get into the March Madness tournament. That's going to go a long way. Also, we talked about Providence. Xavier upset UConn before Providence did. Like I said, back-to-back losses. Don't need to talk about that one too much, but some standout performances there for Xavier. Jack Nungy was battling the flu during that game, apparently, and he had a big game. Also, Colby Jones, super good player. I think Sully Boom gets a lot of the credit there for Xavier, but they got two really good guards, and one of them is Colby Jones. He has been playing very good as of late. Now let's talk about Pitt, because the Pitt Panthers have had a few upsets here the past few games, and they just got a big one over Virginia, and they played that game so well. Blake Henson has been a super underrated player so far this year in college basketball, and a lot like that Rutgers win is going to help them propel them into March. These back-to-back wins where Pitt defeated North Carolina and also Virginia are going to really help them make a case to be in the March Madness tournament as long as they can keep winning, especially with how inconsistent the ACC has been. And we're going to get into all that because we'll go ahead and say it, because tonight, right before recording this video, two major upsets here in the ACC conference as Georgia Tech upsets Miami, and that one was a shocker. Isaiah Wong didn't have his best game. He was on a streak there where he was, playing out of his mind. Didn't really show up for this one. Jordan Miller, Norchad Omier, they had some good played pretty good in this game, but they were unable to get it done. Georgia Tech survived and upsets Miami, and that's a big one, man. Miami was one of the teams I was like, they're actually kind of consistent there in the ACC, but they're the next one to fall, man. It seems like everybody's falling right now. Also, NC State upsets Duke in Raleigh by 20 points. I mean, insane performance. They right out the gate, they dominated Duke. I'm pretty sure Duke only had 10 points, and it was like 11, 12, or it was like 10 minutes into the game. Insane. Duke only had 2 points at that point in the game, but NC State went on, held on the entire game, in control, defeated Duke. And I think NC State has a decent team this year, and I think it's not that crazy for them to win at home against Duke. But the crazy part is how much they won by. Like, are, I don't know about this Duke team when it gets to March Madness. Maybe the ACC will surprise us like they did last year and have some teams go on some runs, but it's really hard to buy into the ACC conference with all of their top 10 or all their top teams, excuse me, kind of dropping week to week. So it's really hard to buy in. But one of the other big time upsets and a massive performance, I mean, this might be my team of the week, is Kansas State upsetting Texas in the Moody Center. First ever win, other than Texas winning, first ever time Texas lost in the brand new Moody Center. And Marquez Noel might be the player of the week to go along with K-State being the team of the week. I mean, he is one of the best passers in the country, if not the best passer in the country. I mean, this guy is amazing. And Kansas State was projected to be last in the Big 12 this season, and they are starting off 2-0 in conference play with a road win at Texas, and that is a tough place to play. I mean, we saw Creighton went into there, got beat. Gonzaga went into there and got beat badly, man. So this is a very impressive win by Kansas State. Not only did Marquez Noel, was he a magician with the basketball as far as passing and getting the assist, but he was scoring, and Kansas State put up 116 points on Texas. No overtime needed, just in regulation, 116 points. Insane performance. And a few days before that, they defeated West Virginia at home in overtime. Closed out that one. Marquez Noel had a big game in that one as well. So Kansas State, look for them to be ranked 100% next week. I mean, depending on who they play this Saturday, and if they can get a win in that one. But I think Kansas State definitely deserves to be ranked. They look really good. Losing Nigel Pack this offseason, projected to be last place in the Big 12. It looks like they are for real and a tournament team. And Marquez Noel might actually be an upgrade from Nigel Pack at this point in time. Also, another big time upset, you had Iowa State defeat Baylor. Baylor's actually 0-2 to start off Big 12 play. I mean, crazy how tough it is to win on the road in the Big 12, which is why it's so impressive that TCU was able to go into Baylor and defeat them tonight. And also that Kansas State was able to go into Texas and put up 116. That just makes it all that more impressive. But Ames, Iowa is a very tough place to play, and they defeat Baylor at home, controlled that entire game. Another really good win there. One more upset we have to talk about is we talked about UConn and Purdue getting beat up, but there was one more remaining undefeated team in Division I basketball, and that was the New Mexico Lobos, and they also got caught on the road by Fresno State, and they weren't the last remaining undefeated team for long. It did not take them long to fall, but New Mexico is still a very good team, coached there by Rick Pitino's son, and they're still 14-1. They got a sold-out crowd at home against a pretty good UNLV team coming up this Saturday. Going to be a very good environment there. I'm excited to try to get watch that game for a little bit because it's going to be, like I said, an awesome environment there. So upsets all across the board in every conference almost. It seems like a lot of top teams are falling as we get into the start of league play. League play is just so tough on the road, man, and this just goes to show you at the beginning of every conference play, there's going to be some big time upsets because the environments, the atmospheres are insane. Players feed off that, man. Players feed off that. I truly believe it, and it's tough in college for sure. But that brings me to my next topic, which is the hardest places to play in college basketball. We all know Kansas is Allen Fieldhouse. We know Duke's Cameron Indoor Stadium. We know Kentucky's Rupp Arena. We know Indiana's Assembly Hall, Purdue, Mackey Arena, all the more notable ones that we kind of know, right? But there are some underrated environments that I've noticed this year. And when these teams are good, the fans show up and they are loud. And the first one, we'll go ahead and talk about it because they just pulled off a big time upset tonight, and that was Providence in the AMP Arena. I mean, the formerly known as the Dunkin' Donuts Center, but the AMP was rocking, and it was all loud last year. I mean, if this Providence team is good, the AMP is going to be one of the hardest places to play in all of college basketball. And big shout out to the Providence fans. I think they really had a toll on this UConn game, and they were the players were really feeding off of it. Like I said, Bryce Hopkins had an insane game, one of the hardest places to play in basketball for sure. It was last year when Providence was good. Big East champs last year. This year, they're 4-0 in the Big East. Got big wins over Marquette and UConn at home already this year. Providence and the AMP, one of the hardest places for sure. Also, New Mexico, like I said, first sold out game in a while for New Mexico. But when New Mexico is good, the pit gets rocking as well. This place will be loud this Saturday, which is why I want to tune in for this game a little bit versus UNLV. Sold out crowd. It's going to be a fun one in the pit. Definitely a tough place to play. And I think that team, they kind of got a wake-up call against Fresno State. They are going to put the hammer on UNLV, feeding off that crowd. I'm excited to see it, man. Another big one, the Cintas Center in Cincinnati is Xavier's Stadium, and that place gets bumping as well. I mean, they were super loud whenever UConn came to town, and that was without students. That was insane. Xavier is a very tough place to play, and I know this as a WVU fan. We played there this year. That place, super loud. I think Xavier and Providence probably have the two loudest stadiums in the Big East Conference. Let me know in the comments. Who's loud? Whose stadium do you guys think is louder, the AMP or the Cintas Center? Let me know in the comment section for sure. Two more underrated ones I have listed here is Iowa State. Iowa State has a very good crowd, and when this Iowa State team is good, their fans show up and they are loud, man. That game against Baylor, they're in the Hinton Coliseum, excuse me. I mean, it was super loud. The Cyclones really show up for their team, and they're really good this year. They have a squad, and I don't see Iowa State losing too many home games this year, which is they just picked up a big road win on the road against Oklahoma. That's huge because if they can pick up some road wins, they're in the Big 12. I don't see them losing at home too much. They could get a pretty high seed this year in the March Madness tournament. One more I have is the Pitt Panthers. They call it the Oakland Zoo, and that place gets super loud. It was super loud against Virginia, against North Carolina. It was super loud when my team, West Virginia, played there. It wasn't a close game. WVU actually blew them out in that game, but Pitt had a big turnaround since then, and recently they've been looking pretty good. They're looking like they're going to be a tournament team. So yeah, the Oakland Zoo definitely shows up when the Pitt Panthers are a good team. So our next topic here, we have who should be the number one team in college basketball. We saw Purdue, the former number one team, go down this week to Rutgers, and who should be the next number one team in college basketball? Also, UConn, some people considered to be their number one team in hoops as well. They lost 2 in a row now. So who do you go to? I believe there are 4 very solid options. So we're going to break down those 4 teams' resumes and really just break it down, and I will let you know who I think is number one. I want to know who you guys think should be the number one team in the country at this point as well. So let me know that down below in the comments as well. Quick drink real quick, but let's get into the contenders. My first one is the Kansas Jayhawks. I mean, the Kansas Jayhawks, have been super good all year long. Their only loss is to a very good Tennessee team, a Tennessee team that's looking very solid. I mean, they just destroyed. That's another really good home court is Tennessee. They didn't lose a home game last year. They just destroyed Mississippi State at home. They're looking very, very solid, and they have a solid win over this Kansas team, and that's their only loss. That's what the Kansas only loss. But they have, in my opinion, they might have the best resume. Lost to a very good Tennessee team, and they have really good wins over Duke, Wisconsin, Missouri, Indiana, and a road win against Texas Tech and Lubbock, another really good atmosphere. I mean, I know I'm missing out some atmospheres, some really good arenas and fans. There are a ton of them in college basketball, so I just wanted to let you guys know. I know there's a lot more, but some of the more honorable, underrated ones that I wanted to mention here in this podcast. But yeah, Kansas, Duke, Wisconsin, Missouri, Indiana, and Texas Tech on the road, all super good wins, and they have been playing really good as of late, looking like maybe they should be the number one team in the country. Also, Arizona, only loss is to Utah on the road. Not sure what happened in that one because this Arizona team looks really good. You're going to slip up at points, though, but Arizona has solid wins over San Diego State, Creighton, Indiana, Tennessee, and Arizona State. All super good wins. I think at this point it's between Arizona and Kansas, but I definitely would hear arguments for these other two teams to be considered for that number one spot as well. Interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. But my other two mentions that I believe definitely deserve a mention, and I could see be argued to be the number one team at this point in time is the Houston Cougars. The Houston Cougars' only loss is to Alabama, although that was a home game. Houston has still looked super good throughout the rest of the season. They have good wins over St. Mary's, Virginia on the road, Central Florida, and Oregon. And out of these four teams, I believe Houston doesn't have as good of wins as the other three teams. Even that win at Virginia, which is a super good win. Virginia, tough place to play. They have a veteran team there. Not easy to go into Charlottesville and come out of there with a W, but Virginia has been losing lately. Like we mentioned earlier, they did just get upset by Pitt. They lost to Miami not too long ago. So that win might not look as good as it once did, but still a very solid win. But other than that, they don't really have too many good wins on the season. The only other team that I would even consider a top 50 team that they have a win against is St. Mary's. So take what you will from that. But Houston, I still believe, has an argument for the number one. I personally would probably rank them fourth out of these top four teams at this point in time. But the fourth and final team, I believe, could have a shot at still being the number one team is Purdue. They were recently the number one team, got upset by Rutgers. That is their only loss, but they still have a very good resume. They have good wins over West Virginia, Duke, Marquette, and Gonzaga. Those are all super solid wins, and they're getting into Big Ten play. So maybe this will be a wake-up call here for this Purdue team. Sometimes whenever you're, on the brink of losing, like they were against Nebraska in overtime, they played in some close games, and then you finally lose one, and then it's kind of like a big wake-up call. Can you thrive after getting upset and head into the next game and kind of get back on track and show us what you were at the start of the season? That's what Purdue needs to show me. I wouldn't have them number one this week, but definitely deserve an argument with a resume like that for sure. So for me, it's between Kansas and Arizona. Both of these teams have very good resumes, very good arguments to be the number one team in the country. I think I'm going to have to give the edge actually here to the Kansas Jayhawks. I think Kansas has just looked super good as of late, and I've been one to say I don't know about this team. They don't really have a true center. KJ Adams, he's kind of an undersized center at the position, but he's been playing pretty good and he's getting better every game. And he's only a sophomore, so plenty of time to improve through a gauntlet in the Big 12. Kansas with a very gritty, tough win at Texas Tech, 2-0 now in the Big 12. Not easy to do. They got a big test in Morgantown this Saturday, another tough place to play. If they can come out of that one, 2-game road trip to Texas Tech and to West Virginia, not easy to come out of that 2-0. So if they do, I expect them to be ranked number 1 in the next poll on Monday. I know if they can defeat West Virginia now on the road, back to back after defeating Texas Tech in Lubbock, they're going to be number 1 in my updated power rankings for sure. The other one I could definitely see, this is the one I would mainly hear you out on, is Arizona. Like I said, they have very solid wins on the season over teams like Indiana, Tennessee, even Creighton whenever they were at their peak. San Diego State, a very solid team, got a good win over them. Arizona State, like they have really good wins. That only loss is to Utah, though. I think, Kansas technically has the better loss as well. But Arizona, they're a mismatch problem. I was talking about Kansas. I was worried about KJ Adams being undersized. He's getting better and better. They have 2 really good guards, and Daquan Harris Jr., who is an excellent passer and a great ball handler, and another really good guard in Bobby Pettiford, another sophomore who I believe is getting better and better each game, and a super good passer and ball handler in his own right there as well. Of course, we all know they have a superstar in Jalen Wilson and one of the best freshmen in the country in Grady Dick, who is also improving in every game. So Kansas really had a super good rebuild in one season from all that they lost from that national championship team last year. But Arizona, they have a lot of solid pieces as well. They have, in my opinion, the best front court in the country with Azuolas Tubelis and also Ballo at center. I mean, those are 2 almost true 7-footers to have in your starting lineup. Tubelis is 6'11" and he can shoot the rock, put the ball on the floor, and drive it right on you. Ballo is a 7-footer and he is just a beast, a defensive force, and a rebound machine. And he can also score on the inside as well. Get it to him down low. One of the more underrated centers in the country, but there are a ton of really good centers in college basketball this season and really the past few seasons. It has been really something special to watch, see all these really good centers start to dominate college basketball again, because it used to be like there for a while, the center position is kind of going away, especially a dominating center in the post, inside scoring. It is starting to go away. So it's really nice to see the past few years, some of the best players in college basketball coming from the center position and being like true traditional centers that score on the inside, not ones that are just stretch fives and stuff like that. So very good to see. In my opinion, if Kansas wins Saturday, like I said, that tough 2-game road trip, they deserve to be number 1. Arizona right behind them at number 2. Arizona definitely could see an argument for them. I would definitely hear out arguments for Houston and Purdue. But right now, I would say Kansas is the number 1 team in the country after these upsets. So now let's get into the ending portion of the podcast. And that, of course, is my top player of the year candidates and also my top national championship contenders. And we got a little bit of our rankings are shaken up this week. Usually we have, we've had the same teams, especially in the national championship contenders, week after week. But with all these upsets, I'm starting to shake things up here this week. So it's going to be interesting for sure. So let's start with the player of the year candidates. And of course, after we do these, I do have some questions from Twitter. Again, make sure you guys follow the Twitter at 6man Danny on Twitter. Always talking college hoops on there, and that is where you will be able to ask your questions to be in the next podcast as well. But top player of the year candidates, even after the loss, I still got to go with Purdue's Zach Edey at number 1. I mean, he has just been so dominant this year. You got to double team him. Most of the time, most teams will have to double team Zach Edey. So very tough matchup problem there. He's a beast on the glass. He's also a super good defender. Don't sleep on him on his defensive side as well. As good as he is on the glass and scoring the ball in the post, he's also very good defensively, very good at the free throw line. Zach Edey still coming in here as my number 1 player of the year candidate so far this season. At number 2, I think this guy actually jumped up a little bit from last week, and that is Drew Timme. Drew Timme has been dominating the past few weeks for Gonzaga, and I keep telling myself, man, he's going to slow down. He's going to have an off game. Nope, he just keeps dominating, and I really don't think Drew Timme is going to slow down at any point the rest of the season running through the West Coast Conference. I think Drew Timme is just going to dominate. Very tough player to guard there. And Drew Timme's up here at number 2 now. At number 3, I do have Azuolas Tubelis from Arizona. Talked about him a little bit earlier. 6'11" guy that can shoot. I say this every week. Can drive to the rack, good defender, super good player, top NBA prospect. He's averaging about 20 a game, getting the boards as well. Really good defender. He's in here at number 3. Next up at number 4, I could see arguments for him maybe being number 3 on this list. I could probably consider putting him above Tubelis. It was kind of neck and neck here for the number 3 spot, but at number 4, I do have Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller, best freshman in the country. Top NBA prospect for good reason. He's averaging near 20 points a game. Just lengthy guy that can dribble, shoot. Kind of reminds you of that Kevin Durant, Brandon Ingram type player. Kevin Durant had an insane season his freshman year at Texas. Brandon Ingram had a super good year there at Duke whenever he played. And he kind of reminds you, he has the same build, kind of the skinnier, tall forward that can score at all 3 facets, all 3 levels of the game. Super good player in Brandon Miller, and I believe that they have actually some potential to go deep in this year's tournament. I mean, they got a star on their hands. Nate Oates has a star there for Alabama at the forward position, and his name's Brandon Miller for sure. And at number 5, I decided to go with Jalen Wilson, the forward for the Kansas Jayhawks. I mean, Kansas has just been looking super good as of late, and really pretty much other than that Tennessee game, they've just been dominating and looking really good, playing good basketball, and Jalen Wilson is a big part of that. He shot the ball a lot against Texas Tech, and he was draining them early in that one, but he kept shooting them. He started to miss. If he can get that 3-point shot to be a little bit more consistent, this guy is going to be an absolute problem come March Madness. So keep improving that shot, man. Jalen Wilson, even without it, I mean, he's still hitting it sometimes. Even without it, just a dominating player, averaging 20 and almost 10 rebounds a game there for the Kansas team, like I mentioned earlier. Kansas doesn't really have a super good center. KJ Adams Jr. there handles it, but he's an undersized center there at like 6'8". So they rely on Jalen Wilson and Kevin McCullough to really grab those rebounds. So Jalen Wilson gets a lot of boards there as well. Honorable mentions, I have 2 of them, both from the Big 12, both point guards. First one, Marquez Noel, plays for Kansas State. They had a big week this week. Probably not going to get that mention from a lot of people just because, it's Kansas State. They don't really know his name. They didn't know him preseason. But if he keeps playing like he did the past 2 games, he's definitely going to keep climbing my rankings, especially if he leads Kansas State to be, a lot better throughout the season. He definitely deserves this mention. He's averaging almost 10 assists per game. I think it's like 8.5, something like that. He's getting like 16 points per game at Texas on the road. When they beat them, he put up 30 points, 8 assists, excuse me. He's also averaging 2 steals a game, so he's a short point guard who is super fun to watch. I'm saying this as a WVU fan. He tore us up passing the ball and in that Kansas State game, and I can't lie, super fun to watch. Marquez Noel. I hated him whenever we played him, when WVU played him, but when he's not playing West Virginia, super fun player to watch. Definitely tune into some Kansas State games and check out Marquez Noel. He's getting an honorable mention spot for my Player of the Year candidates. He has played that good this week and really all season. He's just really starting to get recognized. And my other honorable mention comes from Mike Miles. I just watched him put 33 points up in Waco on the road on this Baylor team, a Baylor team that has really good defensive guards in a freshman Keontae George, Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer. We all know Scott Drew always has good defensive guards and a good defensive scheme for those guards. Baylor didn't really play that great defensively in this TCU game, but still, Mike Miles, 33 points, down 4 with under a minute to go, hits a crazy pull-up 3 to give him those 33 points and assisted on the go-ahead shot with 3 seconds left for that TCU game. But Mike Miles averaging near 20 points a game all season, 3 assists, 3 rebounds. Really good player, and I think we all expected Mike Miles to be super good this year. But because Texas Tech got upset by a really bad team early in the year, when Mike Miles wasn't even playing in that game, I think a lot of people wrote Mike Miles off, but he did not write back. Mike Miles, super good player. I think after that performance, a lot of eyes are going to be on him. TCU 2-0 to start Big 12 play, a good home win last week, and a good road win against Baylor yesterday or tonight as I'm recording this video. So really good players here on this list and some new players. So love to see that. And now let's get into our national championship contenders because we actually have a new number 1, a new number 2, and a new number 3 on my national championship contenders. So a big week, a lot of changes. As you all know, I do try to change it up, but for the past so many weeks, it's been number 1 UConn. Purdue's been floating in there. I don't know if I still trust this Purdue team to be able to go all the way yet. I don't know if they have the consistent shooting from behind the arc to surround Zach Edey to really make a deep push into the tournament. I think they'll get Sweet 16, Elite 8, possibly Final 4. But I really do find it hard to believe that Purdue is going to be able to win the national championship this season. So, but forever, UConn has been my number 1. Back-to-back losses, they're not in my top 3 this week. At number 1, I do have the Kansas Jayhawks. We already talked about them a lot in this podcast. I really do like the ball handlers that they have in Daquan Harris and also Bobby Pettiford. Really good players, and of course, they have their superstar in Jalen Wilson. So Kansas is in here at number 1, the defending national champions. Expected to have somewhat of a rebuild here, still expected them to be super good, one of the more prestigious programs in college basketball. Still thought that they would be pretty good, but didn't expect them to be, potentially the number 1 team in the country with how much they've lost from last year's national championship team. But they are looking very, very solid. At number 2, I do have the Houston Cougars. I just think that this Houston team I know they don't have the best resume, which is why I didn't have them ranked, number 1 or number 2 whenever I was talking about who should be number 1 earlier. But I believe that this Houston Cougar team is built for March. I think that this team in March Madness with head coach Marcus Sasser, or not Marcus Sasser, with their point guard Marcus Sasser and their head coach Kelvin Sampson. Kelvin Sampson always performs really well in March. Last year without Marcus Sasser, they went to the Elite 8. This year they're going to have him. They have a stud at the center position, freshman Jairus Wallace, who as you guys know, if you guys have been listening to the podcast or my videos, I'm a big fan of Jairus Wallace. I think he's a really good player there at the center position, and only a freshman. He's going to keep improving game by game all the way throughout this year. And I think that this Houston team truly is built for March and has the potential to win it all this season. The Final Four is being hosted in Houston, Texas. So I don't know. That kind of makes me feel like Houston is going to make the Final Four this year. It's in Houston, Texas. I definitely think that they can get to the Final Four, and they definitely have the team to do it and the coach to do it. So Houston here in at number 2. And number 3 is going to be a surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people would probably have Arizona, Purdue, might still have UConn up here, might have Tennessee after their dominating win over over Mississippi State. Tennessee never really performs in March, though, so it's hard to pick them to win it all. Maybe some people have Gonzaga. They have been looking amazing lately. But my number 3 is actually the UCLA Bruins. I've said this many times, but I believe that this UCLA team is the best UCLA team in quite a while. I think it's better than the 2 teams that they've had the past 2 years with Johnny Juzang. And they have a really solid roster. Jamie Jaquez, Tiger Campbell, 2 veteran studs. Tiger Campbell always plays well when we get to March Madness, so it is so crucial to have a veteran point guard who has been to the Final Four, has been to, I think they made the Sweet 16 last year, who always shows up and performs in March Madness. They also have a freshman, Amari Bailey, who is getting better and better game by game. He is going to improve by the time we get to March Madness, and he's already pretty darn good. Also, Jalen Clark has been a huge surprise for me for this UCLA team. I mean, he's averaging 15 points a game around there. Super good player, underrated player on this Bruins team. Didn't expect him to really play as well as he is right now, but really defensively as well. Jalen Clark is a big piece to this team, and I have UCLA as my 3rd national championship contender at this point in the season. So big surprise, but I want to go with a little bit of a sleeper here for my number 3 spot, and I'm a big believer in this UCLA team right now. So they're in here now at number 3. So now let's get into this week's questions. We have a few questions here coming in from Twitter. Make sure if you guys want your question in the podcast next week, you go follow me on Twitter at SixManDanny, and I will tweet out on Wednesday morning asking for your guys' questions, and you guys can reply to that tweet there, and that's how you get them here into the podcast. So our first question is coming in here from Bryce Hopkins fan, and he is asking, who is an overrated team in the top 10 and an underrated team that is currently unranked right now? So overrated top 10 team, I got 2 right now, and my first one is probably UConn. I feel like they're probably going to drop out of the top 10 at this point. Back-to-back losses. I know it's in 2 very tough environments at Xavier and at Providence, but you still would expect them to, try to split those games or at least play a little bit closer there at the end of that Providence game. So I would say right now, UConn, I think that they were somewhat overrated just because I had them as my number 1 team. I had them as my number 1 team before they went and lost to Xavier. So I personally probably overrated them. I still think that they have a ton of potential to win the national championship this year. They'll be back, but their offense just hasn't been looking as good the past 2 games. So I'm going to have to go with UConn. Also, maybe Texas. Texas giving up 116 points just in regulation at home. Their defense definitely definitely needs some work. So I think I'm going to have to go with Texas as well. But for an underrated, unranked team, I got two honorable mentions before I give my answer to an underrated, unranked team. My two honorable mentions are Kansas State, who just defeated West Virginia at home, and then they defeated Texas on the road. Back-to-back games, big games there for Kansas State. So they're a big honorable mention. And my other honorable mention is Providence. Providence, unranked at this point, same with Kansas State, but Providence just picked up a big win over UConn. And, they have really good, solid wins on the season. They're 4-0 in Big East play on an 8-game win streak. Providence, another honorable mention. The reason I have them as honorable mentions and not my picks, though, are because I believe that they are going to be ranked when next week's rankings come out, or if there were rankings come out right now, they would be ranked. So that is why I have them as honorable mentions, purely because that reason. But the underrated team that I don't think is quite going to be ranked this week, but is super underrated, and even before they just beat Purdue, I have been a big fan of this Rutgers team, and Rutgers is the team I'm going to go with because they are one of the best defensive teams in the country. They're with Caleb McConnell, veteran player, one of the best defensive players in the country. Cliff Amorie, a really good center, underrated center in college basketball, and one of the best defensive centers in college basketball. So I'm going to go with Rutgers as a super underrated, unranked team, and they just beat Purdue in Mackey. So that's going to hold a lot of weight. But even before that win, I thought Rutgers was super underrated. So next question we have coming in here from my man Jayhawk Fan 33, aka Aaron. He says, what conference has the worst refs in college basketball? And honestly, all the refs are pretty bad across college basketball, but it is very hard to be a referee in college with how hard these players play, how physical they get. Like, it's very hard to ref games in college basketball. So there I have to say all of them are pretty bad. My own personal bias, I believe the Big 12 refs are super good or super bad. Just watched the ending of the Iowa State-Oklahoma game. Oklahoma about tackled an Iowa State player inbounding the ball late on, and there was a no call. They called it a turnover. Could have caused a crazy outcome for the ending of that game. Luckily, Iowa State was still able to pull that one out, and it didn't affect the game at all. But still, crazy no call there. And just, if you guys watched, most of you guys probably didn't because it was on ESPN Plus, and it was just a random game on New Year's Eve. But West Virginia versus Kansas State, both sides just extreme amount of foul calls. There were, I think, 4 or 5 players total in that game that fouled out, and about 3 or 4 other players that had 4 fouls. So yeah, there were a lot of fouls in that game. Definitely go look up the stats for how many fouls were called in that game. Both teams were horrendous shooting from the foul line as well. But I got to go with the Big 12 refs. Bias-wise, also Pac-12 refs are awful. Tune into a Colorado Utah game, something late at night, and just watch some of the calls. It gets pretty bad. So also the Pac-12. Last question coming in here from my man Alex, and he asked, who are in your opinion the top 5 most unguardable players in college basketball at this point? So this was a tough one for me to decide because unguardable could mean a few different things. Do you mean it could mean like unguardable, just unstoppable forces, like who is more dominant? So in that case, you could go with some centers. Or do you mean like unguardable, like one-on-one dribble ISO situation? So I decided to go with a little bit of both here. So dominance wise, I went with 3 centers that I believe are just super dominant and super unguardable in the post, and that is Zach Edey, just because he's so huge, so dominant, super hard to guard there. Also Oscar Tshiebwe, just super unguardable. He's a big guy. He's really good at scoring there in the post. And then also Drew Timme, another center who is super unguardable in the post, and he's more finesse, while the other two are more power. But Drew Timme, super good in the post there, has a really deep bag with his post moves and super hard to guard. And we've been seeing that as of late. Some of the guys that I believe are super hard to guard when it comes to ISO situations, some guards that really have a really nice bag when it comes to ISO situation. I decided as a sleeper one, but Adam Flagler at Baylor, I see him so many times hit some step back threes, super unguardable and that fast that he can also drive to the rack. So you're not really sure what he's going to do. I believe Adam Flagler, a really tough player to guard one-on-one there in ISO situations. So I decided to put him here on the list. And another player I have here is Kendrick Davis. Kendrick Davis is a guy who can shoot, drive, pass, just extremely unguardable, a tough player to guard there at all three levels of the game. And he puts up a lot of points on a game-to-game basis. So yeah, that is going to do it for the questions and for the podcast. Really appreciate everybody that listened. Make sure you guys check out some of my other videos. There's a big rumor going on. There's a big news that broke actually about the NCAA committee and how they're trying to get the board to expand the March Madness tournament to 96 teams. Got a whole video on that out. Bunch of college hoops content coming out every single day, so you don't want to miss it. Definitely check out the channel and hit that subscribe button if you guys have not already. And hit that like button so I know you guys are enjoying the podcast and you guys want to keep listening to these every single week. And like I said before, we're now doing the podcast as videos. I feel like it's going to be easier for you guys to find and be able to listen to it in that way. So we're going to be posting our podcast at noon every single Thursday. It will premiere live as a video, but it won't be a live stream. So still under the video tab now instead of being live late Thursday night. I think this is a lot more convenient for all of you guys. So we're doing a little bit of a switch up. So now instead of asking you questions in the live chat when we are streaming, we have the questions coming in from Twitter. So make sure you guys go follow the Twitter again at 6mandanny there. And yeah, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate all you guys. I'm out.